Hey everybody, Turk alongside Rod here to talk MSU recruiting, which is actually still a thing in today's basketball environment, maybe more so at Michigan State than other programs. Before we begin, a quick word of thanks to all of you who listen, obviously support the show, and an apology to the for the mid-show ads the last two episodes that got inserted. That's completely on me. I was trying to get everything ready for the vacation, and I have to actually actively deselect the mid-roll ads, and so that they just get put in randomly and super annoying. And I apologize, and I do everything I can to try and avoid those being there, and they should not be there anymore. So our goal is always has never been to maximize revenue, but it's certainly just to make a good listening experience and also have our sponsors as like part of the show and be make things a little bit more fun. So, all right, so that's enough of that. So, Rod, let's talk about recruiting and what's going on for Michigan State. This used to be something we talk about a lot more, but with the emergence of the portal, it seems like at least high school kids are a little more forgotten than they have in the past.
Yeah.
Certainly, uh, the conversation with fans, there's you almost hear no talk about recruits unless it's someone who's like a top 10 recruit or someone like some big, huge, splashy player. No one really gets excited. I think, not Caleb, sorry, Cam Ward and Jordan Scott, who are coming next year. I don't think there's been a whole lot of talk about them. There's been a whole lot of enthusiasm, and it's not because of who they are. I think in large part, I think people should be more excited about them. But I think it's just the fact that there's just so much more focus on, the shiny thing that we've seen play in D1 ball or whatever. And there's just more excitement just about this transfer, this sort of churn.
Well,
And so these high school players kind of get forgotten. But, as Jason Richardson showed last year, they're still super important to the development of your program and success.
yeah, let's talk about that for a second. I do not disagree with your conclusion at all, in terms of, there being less emphasis, even in terms of fan interest, placed on high school recruiting. And I think also part of it is that people are, fans look around and they say, well, freshmen, you win. Think about all the talk around this year's Final Four. It was transfers and
Right.
guys that were 25 years old on some of these rosters, which is not even an exaggeration, it's a fact.
Oh, I know.
um, and and so they see that that seems to be the formula by which people are winning, and so there's just less interest than ever. We're long past the old Coach K and Cal one and done wars. Who could get the most top 20 players
Right.
on an annual basis and reload with just freshman dominated team after freshman dominated team. I do think with Michigan State, though, there's also another factor, which is just how it is. Um, you mentioned the two guys coming in this year, Cam Ward and Jordan Scott. Cam Ward's from Maryland, Jordan Scott's from Virginia. So very few people who are Michigan State fans have ever seen these guys play live.
Sure. Sure.
All right. And that's been true, the last few recruiting cycles. And frankly, what we're about to talk about, this next one, kind of feels like it's going to be that way yet again.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of Michigan kids, or sometimes any. There's a chance, a pretty damned good chance, actually, that nobody that Michigan State offers this year will be a Michigan kid. Now, you think about that, you put that in the context of what this program has been under Tom Izzo, and before Tom Izzo too, but definitely under Tom Izzo, and you think about the 2000 team. You think about
Yeah.
even as recently as the 2019 Final Four team
Yeah. Right.
was
Yeah. With
built
Cassius and
very
David
much
Tillman. Yeah. Right.
on start with, Michigan kids were always going to be the backbone, and you would fill that in largely with kids from Ohio, Indiana, and then sometimes Illinois. You get an occasional kid from Minnesota or Wisconsin, but it was almost exclusively an upper Midwest thing. When Michigan State had Chris Allen and he came from Georgia, that was such an outlier for what this program has been that it was striking.
Right.
Now, it wouldn't even catch your attention because in the last few years, it really has changed. That's not, by the way, it's important to note, that's not Michigan State saying, well, we're just not interested in kids from our home state anymore. I think all else being equal, Tom Izzo would love a roster of Michigan kids with a Michigan background. I think he'd prefer it because for a number of reasons. Those kids grow up knowing the program.
Right.
So there's
Hmm.
less, there's less risk, I guess, in, buyer remorse, let's say.
Yeah.
Uh, they also grow up maybe understanding some things about Michigan State basketball that an out of state kid doesn't necessarily. He has a much easier time getting to know them extremely well because it's, a matter of taking, in most instances, a 2 hour drive max, as opposed
Right.
to, getting in a plane.
Hmm.
But that's not the way it is. Basketball talent
Yeah.
in Michigan specifically, and I would even extend that out to the upper Midwest generally, has been in a down cycle for a while. It's it is if you talk to somebody who was 25 years old and you tried to tell them there was a time not all that long ago where the state of Michigan in a given year might have, you know, 7, 8 top 100 recruits. That stuff used to happen with regularity.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember my senior, to date myself, my senior year of high school, the top three players in this state were Terry Mills, who was considered either the first or second best player in the country, and went on to have a long NBA career. Derek Coleman, who was a superstar at Syracuse and then ended up again, long NBA career.
Right.
And Willie Burton, who I think might be the all time leading scorer at Minnesota, also had a long NBA career. Those were the top three. There were more guys behind them that played high level D1 basketball. And that was normal. That wasn't any kind of outlier. We don't have that anymore. And
Yeah.
so I think when you put those elements together, along with just generally people understanding, well, the way you win today is you get old and you stay old, that all combines to produce less rampant interest in high school recruiting than there used to be, even like
Yeah.
5 years ago.
Yeah.
But it is also important to note, as I think you alluded to, that at a place like Michigan State, it still does matter. Now, Tom Izzo probably isn't going to go out and put together 5-man recruiting classes the way he once did in certain years. Probably doesn't even put together a 4-man class unless something really unusual happened. I think you're probably looking at least the way things are right now, you're probably looking at, 2 to 3
Yeah.
as being the target. He took 2 this year. They would have taken a third if certain guys had opted to commit to Michigan State. I think the 2 guys they took were guys they were going to take regardless. And then there were some other
Yeah.
guys
Right.
that could have chosen Michigan State and they would have taken them as well. This year remains to be seen. I will say this as kind of a preface to what we're about to talk about. This is a year more than any I can ever recall where you don't seem to have the very obvious drumbeat of, well, these are clearly the plan A guys, and there are
Right.
some guys who have been recruited more heavily or have reciprocated interest more obviously than others, but it's very much a wide open scenario. As I say, I'm pretty sure they're going to end up with 2 to 3 guys, but which 2 to 3 guys will be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at and just to hear back to your Michigan thought, I'm trying to think about who on the team right now is from Michigan. Is it just Carson Cooper?
That is
I mean, of
correct.
main starters.
That
So
is
after
correct.
next year, there's potential
If
to
you
have
look at
no one who's
scholarship
from Michigan.
if you look at scholarship players, and that includes the portal guys,
Yeah.
there is one guy. And by the way, that's been the case. Well, last year they had 2 because they had Jaden Akins.
Yeah. Akins has been there for a while. So he's had a
And if you
handful. Yeah.
really wanted to stretch it, you could maybe say Jace Richardson is an honorary one since his
Yeah.
dad is from
But
Michigan, but I wouldn't either. Uh, that's it.
yeah, it's pretty remarkable, actually. Yeah. When you think, but
And
there's a real chance they won't have anybody
and
from
here's
the
the
state of Michigan.
thing.
It's really weird.
Let's say that Eligibility rules remain in place, which would mean that Carson Cooper's career is over after this coming season since he's slated to be a senior. Once that happens, if he doesn't get an extra year and they don't manage to add somebody in the portal who's from Michigan, it's highly likely, I would argue, that next year's team will have no one from the state of Michigan.
Right. No, that's what I'm thinking.
Think
It's kind
about
of
that.
strange. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move into the recruiting update. We're going to talk about the class of 2026 first, and then we'll go to the class of 27 and 28 briefly. I guess the first thing is you had just had made a note for John Sanderson. People are sort of following his commitment. Looks like he's going to Notre Dame. He's point guard at La Lu, so I guess he's off the board, so to speak.
Yeah, that one was, Jonathan Sanders, just to catch people up, spent the first 2 years of high school playing for Saline. His dad was the former strength and conditioning coach at
Right,
Michigan.
that's
Also,
right. I find
also
that
was a
name.
player at Ohio State in the late '90s and I believe early aughts. Uh, the, who famously got in a confrontation that bordered on the physical with Juwan Howard.
But who
Uh,
didn't, right?
well, yeah, I mean, he's not the only one. But obviously, he left that job. He His dad did a very brief stint at Illinois, and then last year he went to Vanderbilt. So Jonathan played in Nashville somewhere. But Michigan State was still very much recruiting him, along with some other upper Midwest schools like Ohio State, like Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
And then his dad recently, within the last month or two, got a job at Notre Dame, and it was just sort of a
Shocking.
fait
It worked
accompli
out.
from there. Yeah, and look, he's a top 100 player, and I think I'm not. I think he could be a good player in college. I'm not crying about this one.
Sure.
I'm not convinced that he's a point guard, and at the same time, I'm not convinced that he's just an incredible shooter and scorer to give you that kind of punch from an off guard spot. I could be proven wrong, but I was never fully bought in. That said, Michigan State did actively recruit him. So they believed in him being potentially a good player to some extent, but it's all water under the bridge now because he's going to be playing for Notre Dame.
Right. So we'll begin with Stephen Reynolds. He's a 6'5" combo guard, formerly from South Bend. His family relocated to Texas. He's top 75 range, and he plays for Mean Streets. And you should say it's been working on landing him for quite a while, it sounds like.
Yeah, Stephen Reynolds. There are a couple of these guys that you could, two or three of these guys, you could say, well, they're long-term recruits.
Sure.
Stephen Reynolds would be one of them. They offered him, I believe, in 2023. Definitely the latest was 2024. And he's an interesting guy. He comes from a basketball family. So his dad is a women's basketball coach, and that is in fact why he moved. His father was the women's coach at the high school Stephen went to, South Bend, Washington, I believe it is. And he got a job as an assistant at the collegiate level in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
Stephen's also got older sisters who play. I think two of them were committed to play for Purdue, I believe. And then they switched their commitments to go play in Texas after all this happened. So it's a move, but for reasons unlike normal moves that we see in the high school ranks.
It's like
This was
my
actually
parents
like
have a job move.
right. It's
Yeah.
the old school transfer, high school transfer thing. So that's why he's down there. You mentioned he plays for Mean Streets, Chicago-based AAU program. This is his first year with them. Uh, he has been, I would say, up and down. Mean Streets as a team has been terrible. All the upper Midwest schools have been or programs rather in EYBL have been pretty bad this
Mm-hmm.
year, but Mean Streets has been especially bad, and he's really struggled. at times, but at other times he's played well. His reputation is, you mentioned his size at 6'5", but he's got a good handle. He's got some playmaking instincts, but I would lean toward him primarily ending up as more an off the ball guy as opposed to a point guard. I think of him more as an off ball guy uh, who could help you the way that Michigan State had last year, where they had guys like Jaden Akins or Jason Richardson, where you're like, well,
Right.
I'm comfortable with the ball in their hands, even if they're not a pure point guard per se. Um, Good size at 6'5". He's a little thin. He's going to need to get stronger, but good height. And he's got the potential, I think, to be a very good offensive player as a shooter. So there's a lot to like here. Michigan State has been involved with him, as we say, for a long, long time. Up to till now, his recruitment's been exactly what you would expect for a guy from South Bend. It's been Purdue and Notre Dame have been perceived to be the main competition for Michigan State. But I think we'll see over the rest of this summer if you start seeing some Southern or Texas schools start to get
Sure.
involved. That's kind of the thing to watch there. But definitely a name to watch if you were handicapping guys in terms of their likeliness to Michigan State. They're going to talk about. He would definitely be in the upper tier of that, just based on the length of time of the relationship and what MSU's needs would be. You'd anticipate. Although now, Christ, these days anything potentially is a need, right? But you would think with Trey Fort as a wing, who's seems to only have 1 year left, and then you don't know at the other wing, will Cohen Carr be around more than one more year? It makes sense. You're going to hear a lot of names of guys of a similar size and positionally similar to Stephen Reynolds, and there's a reason for that.
Right. Yeah, definitely there's a lot more uncertainty as far as what your position needs were going to be from not only just a couple years in the future, but it's even next year
You
because
just have
you
no
know he's going to
idea
stick around.
anymore.
Yeah, you have no
The
clue.
one I
As
should
it's
say this before we get into the rest of it. The one thing you can say with some level of certainty, I think, is that when you look at Michigan State's roster, again, if you assume that there's not going to be a change in eligibility rules, which may not be a safe assumption, but let's just go with that. Well,
sure.
right now, of Michigan State's three guys that at least size wise are posts, two of them are slated to be gone.
Right.
Jax Kohler and Carson Cooper. So that's the one spot that you'd say, boy, you would. Now you can always go get that in the portal too, but just in terms of targeting, you would say, well, that's one spot that you can definitely see. Okay, Michigan State can use post players.
Sure. All right, moving on then to Anthony Thompson. He's a 6'8" wing from Ohio, top 20. Michigan State's in his top 15 for what that's worth. So lots of competition. And the other thing about him, of course, is although he's 6'8", he's a 7'3" wingspan, which is, boy, I would hate to try and find long sleeve shirts.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
He is of everybody. It's funny. You go back to last year, and if you remember, Michigan State seemed to be in on a lot of guys who were ranked very highly in that class, more so than we've seen in a while. Now it ended up the guys they've got were more 50-ish in
mhm.
Cam Ward and Jordan Scott, but they were in on some guys. Remember Jalen Harrison, Darius Adams was ranked very highly. Um, the Dutch kid who ended up going to Arizona. There were guys who were ranked at the upper tier of the rankings. This time around, not as much the case. It's more guys in that 50-ish to 100 kind of range. Thompson is the exception to that. I said top 20 in the notes. That's probably a little unfair to him. He shows up more often than not in top tens. So we're talking
Okay.
about a very good player. And he's, again, we got done talking about this pivot away from the upper Midwest, but the first two guys we're talking about have that background.
Yeah.
Reynolds obviously was an Indiana kid up until now, and Thompson is an Ohio kid. So they're guys who fit the traditional wheelhouse of Michigan State recruiting. He is a big time talent. Um, Not a world, but you're not talking about a Cohen Carr athletically, but the combination of his physical tools in terms of that length you mentioned, um, and and yet he's a wing. I mean, he very much is a skilled player, really skilled. That's what makes him considered an elite recruit. Everybody is basically involved or has tried to get involved in his recruitment. I do not have a firm read other than it seems like I would be, well, they're not limited to 5 official visits anymore, but I would be a little bit surprised, I guess, just based on the little bit I know, if Michigan State doesn't get a visit here, because he's another guy they've been in on for a long time, and it
Yeah.
seems as if they've got a good relationship established. But he would be a great get. He would be the one guy in this class that just individually you get him for whatever recruiting rankings are worth these days, um, would boost your overall class ranking because he is considered an elite talent. And even though we're in this modern era where we talk about you need older rosters, older players to really succeed, that's the general perception, right?
Yeah.
Thompson is likely to be that exception to the rule, the way that somebody like Jace Richardson ended up being, where, hey, he might be a freshman, but he's actually skilled enough, mature enough to impact your team right away.
Yeah. Get some minutes, significant minutes as a freshman.
I
Well,
think
if,
I think at the very least, probably pushing to start. And
right.
maybe even if everything broke the right way, like Jace Richardson, he's the kind of guy, maybe the only player in this whole group who obviously looks like someone that could step up as a not just a guy who gets minutes and even a starter, but a guy who could be one of the focal points of your team offensively. He's got that kind of, and again, that wingspan just makes him, I mean, defensively, what that might be able to mean for you as a
Yeah. No, you can imagine.
rebounder, playing a player like that at the three, that's, yeah, that's a big
Yeah. I
deal
can't,
potentially.
extra 7 inches of reach is kind of, is crazy. Well, if you are looking for elite talent, there's no better place to go than the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If you need your windows cleaned or house washed, the Squeegee Squad can take care of all that. They are working in the large, obviously the greater Grand Rapids area. It's a very large region. Please contact them. You can reach them at our support page at tffinots.com. They do fantastic work. As a listener to the show, you get 15% off by just mentioning Final Four when you get your estimate. They can do not only your house, but maybe your business, high rise, whatever it might be. Squeegee Squad Grand Rapids, they took care of my windows and they're still squeaky clean now. And I'd highly recommend you reach out to Troy and his team uh, as soon as you can. So head on over to the support page to find ways to do that. All right. So the next one is kind of nuts that we're going to talk about him. Latrell Almond, a 6'9", 225-pound post player from Virginia. You mentioned. You're welcome.
It took me a half beat.
That's only what. So he's top 50 national recruit. Obviously, lots of because of that, and because he's a post player, there are a lot of players, or sorry, a lot of schools that are involved in his recruitment as well.
Yeah, I don't know where Michigan State stands in this one. I've seen some information that some people think Indiana sits very, very well with him. Again, a guy from Virginia, so we're talking about getting into that area of the country that Michigan State recruited successfully in the 25 class.
Mm-hmm.
Same state as Jordan Scott, not too far from where Cam Ward is, and I think they've definitely shown some intent um, to to be active in that region of the country, which is a good thing because there's a lot of talent on a year out basis in the DMV. So it makes some sense. Uh, with Almond, there was some talk about Michigan State interest in him going back to say February ish, January, February. And then it was kind of quiet, but I see that they did get out and see him at the last Adidas stop in late May. So
Okay.
that's one to watch. The interesting thing there is he's a post. I just mentioned That's one spot where you look at MSU's roster and it's easy to see, okay, probably or possibly, depending upon what happens with eligibility, um, Michigan State will have a couple of the only returning legit big guy would be Jesse McCullough. So they have a need.
Right.
Allman definitely fits a top 50 guy nationally, 6'9, 225, high energy, high motor player, good rebounder, defensive instincts, and yet there's the potential for him to be a very well-rounded player. Like he's not going to be just a garbage man or back to the basket guy. They think he's got some face-up game too. So that's a name to watch as we go through the summer to see if Michigan State uh, increases the intensity or if it's reciprocated, blah, blah, blah. But a name
Right.
to watch. We'll see what emerges there. I
And we're
also
going to
want
move
to,
out of order.
before you go
Oh,
on to the next, there's a name that I slipped on the notes. And since we're talking about that region of the country, I figure I'll just mention him here.
okay.
Another top 100 recruit, Prince Alexander Moody, who is a
That's a great
six
name.
four ish point guard, but a legit point guard from the DMV. And he's a guy that Michigan State has had some seriousness with in the past. Now, again, haven't heard as much about him lately, but I wouldn't rule out Michigan State being more firmly in that mix. Um, Maybe not a guy with the potential to be a superstar, but the feeling is could be a very solid all around guard for you. Could give you a little bit of shooting. He's definitely enough of a ball handler and has enough point guard skills that you could put him on ball and feel comfortable with that. The size and length gives him some real potential defensively. So that's another name to watch from that part of the country.
And I was just going to say we're going a little bit out of order because I want to talk about who I think you may have heard of this person, if listeners, is Jaxon Richardson. He might be familiar with his
Sure.
father, Jason Richardson, his brother, Jace Richardson. And there's been a lot of talk about Jackson and a lot of people, at least on the message boards, who seem concerned that Michigan State was not recruiting him hard, like making offers and going after him. So anyway, why don't you tell us what's going on with Jackson Richardson? Because of course, as great as it was to watch Jace Richardson play for a year, his brother Jackson is an entirely different player from everything I've heard.
Yes, that's fair to say. Uh, worth worth noting that I wasn't including Jackson only in this only because Michigan State has of yet not offered, and I'll explain what that means here.
Right.
It's not
It means
straightforward.
they're not interested, right? That's what it
Yeah,
means.
no, it does not mean that. Um, he would be the other guy besides Anthony Thompson, who, if you got by himself, would be enough to have people, sit up and take notice.
Right.
He is really good, and he's been over the course of the last few months, the end of his high school season, where his high school won another state title in Florida, and his AAU play has really, the perception of him has gone north as well. And he's definitely a guy who I think it's fair to say is considered an elite recruit. He's in terms of his size and his game and his physical tools and all that, he is much more obviously Jason Richardson's son than Jace
Right.
was. He's 6'6", maybe about 200 ish, with a frame to get bigger, just like his dad did. He is an explosive athlete. I will tell you this: I saw him for the first time when he and Jace were still at Bishop Gorman from Las Vegas. They were playing on ESPN, so this would be probably 2 years ago. And Jackson was in his freshman year, and Jace was hurt, so I didn't get to see him play. But Jackson played, and it was so obvious that he was going to be good, even though he was a little bit raw at that point, because he was just a relentless offensive rebounder, had a nose for the ball. And when you put that together with the obvious physical tools, like, oh, this guy
Yeah.
is going to be a player. Now, he's apparently done a nice job in terms of developing his um, his offensive game, his jump shot, his face up game. So he's got, which again, not a surprise. That's exactly what his dad did. If people remember,
Right.
Jaxon in his freshman year at MSU mostly contributed off the bench via transition and putbacks, that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. He wasn't a good shooter. His sophomore year, he came back. I think he might have shot plus 40% from three, and it was on high volume. Like he made himself in one off season, he made himself a good shooter. And Jaxon needed to go through the same process. And by all accounts, he has done that successfully. So, um, really impressive. Really impressive. The deal here, it's complicated, and I can understand how it's hard for people to grasp, but the early word was that Jaxon was unlikely to be a Michigan State recruit. And
Right.
that was, whether that's just he didn't vibe with Michigan State the same way his brother eventually did. Or keep in mind, people said that about Jace at one point too. And you may realize, some of our listeners may have seen, there was a podcast that came out last week with
Yeah.
Jaxon Richardson on it, where he talked about that and how he was convinced, and Jace even admitted this. Like 2 weeks before the decision, Jace thought he was going to go to Alabama. And then Alabama switched his visit date. And that left an opening which would allow Jace to go to East Lansing for grind week. And
Whoops.
Jason told Alabama, he said, if you let him go to grind week, it's over. And they did, and it was. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about the Jaxon Richardson recruitment. I'm not saying that means he's definitely coming to Michigan State, far from it.
And he's
But
probably been to Grind Week too, I assume, with his
what's
brother and
that?
his dad.
Uh,
I'm sure
I
he's been
would
there
guess
too.
he's probably been around it. It wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprising. He's definitely been to campus. I mean, I know he was on some official and unofficial visits that Jace took.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't think he made it to campus during the season because he had his own stuff going on. Um, but I think that I think you got to keep all that stuff in mind about the offer and all that. My sense is that Michigan State understands the lay of the land here. They've certainly made their interest known, but they're not going to offer unless they know that Jaxon wants to come take an official, all of that.
Hmm.
And I
Right.
think I've got no reason. Yeah, look, there are times, if you're a Michigan State fan, certainly, where you might wish that Jaxon Richardson was much more of an involved, overbearing parent and would say, "No, you're going to Michigan State," but he doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And you just look at, we haven't been exposed to very much of Jaxon, but you look at the kind of person that Jace Richardson is, I'm not calling fault with any of that. So
No.
their approach has worked. And that's my sense that Michigan State is playing this in a way that they believe is smart. Do not do not let yourself believe that the fact they have not extended an offer means that they don't want or have an interest in Jaxon Richardson. Far from it. But it takes two to tango. And
Yeah.
we will see as the rest of this summer unfolds. I think that will define for us what actually happens here. Long-standing talk that he really likes Alabama, which was the same for his older brother.
Hmm. Right.
So that would be a school to watch. He has visited Michigan. I know that that would be very hard to take, were that to happen.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it remains to be seen how that unfolds. But I certainly would not cash in the chips on that one just yet. And one more thing before we move on, I think that um, that what I have heard from people that would be well positioned to know is that uh, the way that Jace's season went did nothing but good things for Michigan State's chances to
Sure.
land Jaxon. And that may seem like an obvious thing to say, but you know,